In the last episode, our boy finally had his first date with Snowy. Everything went so well that they were both already buzzing about the second date. Meanwhile, while Lu Sheng is busy gearing up for the big military competition, the maid seems to be up to something. And let's just say, it's not just laundry she's planning. As we continue the story, after the maid hands over his uniform, Lu Sheng didn't bother to put it on right away. Instead, he tossed it into the trunk like it was just another errand on his to-do list. Outside, the butler was already waiting patiently, as usual. Lu Sheng slid into the back seat, glancing out the window at the bustling streets. He knew that after today's competition in the Eastern Military District, he'd be heading off to the capital once again for the grand military competition. Maybe, just maybe, he could squeeze in a visit home if there was time. Then again, he wasn't sure whether to bring Snowy along for the ride. She did agree on the hospital bed, but what if she changed her mind? Before he knew it, they arrived at the venue. The butler, ever professional, gave him a polite smile and said, "We've arrived, sir." Now the venue was packed with people. The place was massive, big enough to hold tens of thousands of spectators. The moment Lu Sheng stepped out of the car, someone in the crowd noticed him. "That's him! #1 on the star ranking! The blazing son of the East, Lord Lu Sheng is here!" One of them shouted, practically jumping out of his skin with excitement. All eyes turned his way, including several cameras that were now pointed directly at him. Meanwhile, inside a military camp, two guys sat in front of a computer, glued to the screen like fanboys. One of them was a guy wearing glasses. He shook Ming's shoulder, practically bouncing in his seat, saying, "Dude, that's your high school classmate and your best friend, right? The legendary Lu Sheng." The guy was bursting with excitement, and maybe just a little bit of envy that Ming's high school buddy was now a literal living legend. Hearing this, Ming's lips twitched. He wasn't sure how to respond. He decided to say he didn't actually know Lu Sheng. The other dude wasn't buying it, reminding Ming that he had shown him the pictures of them two hanging out. Not only that, but Ming also shared so many stories and how they were best pals ever since they knew each other. However, Ming went silent for a second, then muttered under his breath, saying that all of those photos were photoshopped. The glasses guy blinked, slightly caught off guard. He wasn't sure if he believed Ming since those pictures looked too real. Ming then picked up his phone, staring at a picture of them back in high school, where he had his arms draped over Lu Sheng's shoulders, and both of them laughing like they didn't have a care in the world. If you listened closely, you might have heard Ming whisper, almost to himself, "How could a rock in the mud ever be brothers with a star in the sky?" As the scene shifts to the Eastern Military District headquarters, the marshal sits down while enjoying his afternoon tea. In front of him stands a few of the district's top-ranking generals. He took a sip of tea and spoke, saying, "It's been a while since their Eastern Military District has produced a true idol for the entire army." The generals nodded in agreement. They all thought this was a good thing. Though individual heroism on the battlefield wasn't something to flaunt recklessly, they believed that during other times, a figure like Lu Sheng could serve as a great source of inspiration and motivation for the entire military district. Lu Sheng, in their eyes, was the perfect example of this, and they felt he was the best fit in terms of a role model and perhaps even a hero figure. Seeing their unanimous agreement, the marshal placed his teacup down gently and gazed out the window, turning his back to the room. "Perhaps we should," he started to say, but didn't finish. Either way, he didn't need to, since everyone in the room understood what he meant. General He, a bit concerned, thought it was a bit risky. If Lu Sheng can't pull it off, it might backfire, and all this effort to build his image could crumble. The marshal, however, shook his head. After seeing what Lu Sheng could do on the battlefield, it's clear his true strength goes way beyond what anyone could imagine. If he plays his cards right in this competition, he'll become the hero of the entire Eastern District. And if he slips up, it's just a slight bump in his martial journey. With the marshal's mind made up, the generals respectfully nodded, since they couldn't really find a reason to object. Meanwhile, back at the venue, there wasn't a single empty seat left in the stands. As the camera pointed to the contestants, the host began preparing to officially kick off the Eastern Military District competition. In the stands, Snowy was still wearing the same dress she had while they were on a date. Sitting beside her was Lin Wanwan, who turned to Snowy and asked curiously, "Is your boyfriend here too?" Snowy scanned the arena, eyes darting to the big screens, clearly looking for someone. And soon enough, she spotted him. With a bright smile, she excitedly told Wanwan, "He's here." Back in the waiting area, Lu Sheng was suddenly approached by Dong Shengyi. now dressed in a martial arts uniform with the logo of the Transcendent Martial School on the chest. On the big screen, the two watching couldn't help but feel the tension in the air. Even through the screen, Wan could sense the intimidating aura coming from her senior brother. But when she compared it to Lu Sheng's aura, it was like night and day. While Dong Shengyi felt like a mountain, Lu Sheng's power felt overwhelming, like a blazing sun. The best way she could describe it was they were simply not on the same level. Wan couldn't help but think that her senior brother was in for a tough time. Suddenly, the host stepped forward, microphone in hand, calling for everyone's attention. The crowd quickly quieted down as the host announced the arrival of the marshal and the 5 top-ranking generals. A moment later, the marshal, flanked by several top generals, made his entrance. Lu Sheng glanced at them, thinking to himself that these men must be the absolute peak of military strength in the district. As for the marshal, Lu Sheng estimated his combat power to be at least 50 stars, a relatively conservative guess, perhaps slightly weaker than that of a martial saint. But after his own breakthroughs recently, Lu Sheng wasn't even sure how to measure his own strength anymore. Perhaps he would get the chance to spar with one of the marshals from either of the military districts to gauge his real power. And then maybe he could get a good idea of how strong is a martial saint in this era. The marshal soon began his speech, and the rules of the competition were laid out. As usual, it was straightforward. No one-on-one duels. Instead, it was going to be an all-out brawl. Every contestant would enter the arena at the same time, and the only major rules were no weapons allowed. The last person standing would be declared the winner. Lu Sheng's lips curled into a slight grin. This was going to be interesting. At the same time, he was a bit surprised. This was nothing like the one-on-one martial arts tournaments he had participated in before. This was simple, direct, and a little brutal. Turning to the butler standing beside him, he asked curiously, "Is it always like this? What if someone cheats, like teaming up to take down the strongest, or just bribing people to protect them all the way to first place?" The butler, ever composed, replied, "That's not really considered cheating. Teaming up is allowed by the rules. And if someone gets taken out by a group effort, they weren't really the strongest to begin with." After a brief pause, he added, "After all, strategy is also part of strength." As for bribing others, the butler continued, "Yes, it's happened before. But even if someone buys their way to first place, there's always someone who'll challenge them afterward. If they can't prove their strength, they'll get knocked off that pedestal pretty quickly. Getting beaten up enough times will teach them that being the top dog isn't all it's cracked up to be." Lu Sheng nodded, as he now understood. To be number one, you had to be ready to face constant challenges. There was no rest once you reached the top, unless you were so powerful that no one dared to challenge you in the first place. And that is exactly his kind of game. But the marshal wasn't done yet. His gaze swept across the crowd, finally locking onto Lu Sheng. It felt like the marshal was speaking directly to him, though his words were meant for everyone to hear. With his eyes still fixed on Lu Sheng, the marshal made a startling announcement. He told the crowd that this year's district competition would have a slight change in the rules. His voice was calm, but the weight of his words hit like a bombshell. All the star generals participating would team up and focus their combined efforts on taking down one man, none other than Lu Sheng. So the new rule will be that the fight only ends if either Lu Sheng was the last person standing or one of them. For a split second, the entire arena felt like it was hit by a nuclear blast. The crowd erupted into chaos. Gasps, whispers, and shocked murmurs filled the air. Even the butler, who was usually composed, was visibly shaken. "How could there be such a rule?" he muttered under his breath. "This would mean Lord Lu Sheng has to face off against all of the Eastern District's star generals at the same time." Lu Sheng looked back at the marshal, a grin slowly spreading across his face. Instead of panic, he felt excitement bubbling up inside him. Well, he thought to himself, this competition just got a whole lot more interesting. Hey everyone, quick update on the series. The studio was on holiday last week, so we didn't have any new chapters over the weekend. That means today's video only covers one chapter, which just dropped a few hours ago. You might have noticed the artwork took a bit of a hit this time. That's probably because not everyone's back from vacation yet. Anyway, that's all I've got for today, but don't worry. New parts from Engineer and Witches is coming tomorrow. Thanks for watching, and as always, see you in the next one.